You've done this. You read the chapter. The ideas made sense as you moved through them. You closed the book feeling solid. Someone asked you to explain it 2 days later, and you had nothing. That's not forgetting. It's something more specific. Cognitive scientists call it the illusion of competence, and it's probably the most documented learning error there is. Harvard's academic system is, at its core, one long attempt to make that illusion impossible. This video is about what that actually looks like. 6 specific methods that make it work, none of which require going to Harvard, and all of which transfer to whatever you're currently trying to learn. Before getting into the methods, you need to understand the assumption they're built on, because it's different from what most schools use. Most educational systems run on a transfer model. The teacher has knowledge. They move it through lecture into the student. The student stores and retrieves it on command. The student's job is basically to receive. Harvard's system, especially at the graduate level, assumes the opposite. Understanding isn't transferred. It's built by the learner through active engagement with hard material under conditions that force them to confront what they don't actually know. That distinction explains everything that follows. Once you see that real learning is construction, not reception, it's immediately obvious why passive reading and passive highlighting produce the illusion of competence instead of the real thing. You're receiving. You're not building. Here's the part that's actually uncomfortable. The way most people study, the highlighting, the rereading, the passive review, doesn't just produce mediocre results. According to decades of cognitive psychology research, it produces a specific kind of harm: false confidence. You walk into high-stakes situations believing you're more prepared than you are. You fail not because you didn't try, but because your study method gave you inaccurate feedback about your own readiness. Nobody taught you a better one. School never explained why retrieval practice outperforms rereading. Nobody drew the distinction between recognition and recall. You were handed a highlighter and told to study through 2 distinct pathways. Recognition, identifying something as familiar when you encounter it, and recall, generating information from scratch without a prompt. These feel identical from the inside. When you reread your notes and the material feels familiar, your brain produces a sensation that genuinely feels like understanding. But what you're experiencing is recognition, not recall. The signal is real. The interpretation is wrong. Research by cognitive psychologists Henry Roediger and Mark McDaniel, compiled into their book Make It Stick, found that retrieval practice produces dramatically better long-term retention than rereading. Students who tested themselves performed significantly better on delayed tests. But here's what I find striking. The students consistently predicted the rereaders would do better, because passive rereading feels more productive than it is, and active retrieval feels harder than it seems worth, which is exactly why most people avoid it. Your hippocampus, brain structure responsible for memory consolidation, strengthens a memory every time you effortfully retrieve it. The difficulty isn't a sign the learning is failing. It's the mechanism by which it's actually working. Method 1. Method 1. Right to think there's a finding in cognitive science called the generation effect, first identified by Norman Slamecka and Peter Graff in 1978. Information you generate yourself is remembered far more reliably than information you passively read. When you construct an explanation in your own words, the encoding depth is dramatically higher. For most of my early education, I took transcription notes, fast, detailed, nearly verbatim. I thought the quality of my notes correlated with the quality of my learning. It doesn't. The shift. After every lecture or reading, I close everything and write a summary from memory. Not a perfect summary, a reconstructed one. Everything I can generate without a prompt. The gaps in that reconstruction tell me more than any note I ever took, because they're accurate information about what I actually understand versus what I merely encountered. Try this after your next study session. Close the book, open a blank page, set a timer for 10 minutes, and write everything you can recall in full sentences. No bullet points. A bullet lets you write a fragment and move on. A sentence forces you to commit to a specific claim, and the moment it stalls, you've found a gap. Not a memory gap, a comprehension gap, a place where your brain was navigating by the vague shape of familiarity. Harvard's writing-intensive culture treats writing as the mechanism through which understanding is produced, not the thing you produce after you already understand it. 3 extra minutes of blank page writing per session, compounded over a semester, adds up to something that looks like a completely different level of preparation. Method 2. Design your environment. Harvard's residential house system isn't just a housing arrangement. Students live, eat, and spend unstructured time with people who argue about ideas as a default social behavior. The environment makes intellectual engagement automatic. The culture sustains the behavior without requiring the student to choose it every time. You don't have that. But the underlying principle is available to you. Design your environment so your best learning behavior is the path of least resistance. Study in a location you use only for focused work. Make your phone physically inaccessible during study blocks. Not silenced, actually out of reach. Join or create a study group where explaining material aloud is the expected outcome, not optional. The most useful starting point is this. Identify the single environmental change that would make your worst default learning behavior harder to access. One change. Make it before your next session. Method 3. Use the reading period. Harvard builds a mandated break before exams, typically 5 to 10 days where no new material is introduced. Most students would treat that as dead time. It's not. The brain doesn't consolidate understanding during input. It consolidates during rest, reflection, and the space between exposures. That reading period is institutionalized permission to stop absorbing individual facts and start connecting ideas across subjects, across weeks, across everything that's been covered so far. Build a version of this into your own schedule. After any intensive learning period, take 1 day of deliberate synthesis before moving on. No new input on that day. Only questions like, how does what I just learned change or extend what I already knew? What pattern runs through all of it? You have to schedule it before the intensive period, not after, because after, you'll push forward and skip it. Method 4. Pressure test. Through sections, Harvard pairs large lectures with small group sessions where students have to explain material aloud under peer scrutiny. The U.S. Army independently developed almost the same thing, the after-action review. After any mission or training exercise, the team gathers and each member articulates what happened, what worked, what didn't, and why. 2 organizations built to solve completely different problems arrived at the same structure. That's worth paying attention to. Explaining material to another person forces you to organize your knowledge at a structural level. Identifying what connects to what requires prior understanding, what the actual logical dependencies are. Researchers call this the Protégé Effect, and it consistently produces deeper comprehension than solo review. I'd studied a topic for 2 full days. A friend asked me to explain one piece of it over coffee. I talked for 4 minutes, hit a wall, said, actually, I'm not sure I understand the mechanism there, and found the exact gap I'd have walked into an exam not knowing was there. I'd find one person, a friend, a study partner, a family member, and explain the last thing you studied out loud. No notes. They don't need to understand the subject. They just need to ask why. Whenever you pause or go vague. Method 5. Get your hands dirty. Harvard Business School's case method works because of a specific cognitive mechanism that memory researcher Robert Bjork at UCLA called desirable difficulty. Learning conditions that feel harder in the moment produce better long-term retention and more transferable skill. encountering a problem with incomplete information, making a judgment call, defending it, and updating it when new data arrives. That sequence activates the prefrontal cortex in ways passive content absorption simply doesn't. Your brain isn't a storage device. It's a prediction machine, and it learns best when it makes a prediction, finds out whether it was right, and updates its model. Every time you engage with a real problem that has stakes and ambiguity, your brain treats the resolution as high-value information and stores it accordingly. For whatever you're currently learning, find one real-world with genuine ambiguity. A case study, a current problem in your field, a decision being made by someone in your industry. Engage with it before you know the outcome. Make a prediction, then find out what happened. Your brain releases dopamine most powerfully at the moment of resolution, when the prediction is confirmed or corrected. That's the mechanism case-based learning is exploiting. Every case is a dopamine event engineered into your practice. Method 6. Open your mouth. The Socratic method is built on a simple premise. You don't understand what you can't defend. When a professor forces you to articulate a position and then asks, why? Not once, but repeatedly, past the first polished answer and into the territory where vague comprehension falls apart. They're doing something no textbook can. They're finding the exact depth at which your understanding actually ends. You can do this alone, right now, with a voice recorder or a blank wall. Speak your understanding aloud, not in notes, out loud, because the spoken word forces commitment in real time. No backspace, no revision before delivery. You commit to a claim and immediately hear whether it holds. Stop the moment the sentence stops making sense. Start there. That stopping point is where real studying happens. Epictetus wrote that it's impossible for a person to learn what they think they already know. This is the practical version of that. One more thing before I close. If you're watching this and feeling behind, like this makes your previous approach look naive, that discomfort has a name. Cognitive scientists call it update aversion. The discomfort that comes when new information invalidates a belief you've built behavior around. It's not embarrassment. It's what it feels like when your mental model of something needs to change. I spent 3 years convinced I was a poor learner. I knew the material. I fell apart on exams. I thought something was broken in how my memory worked. I tried every surface-level fix I could find. The turning point wasn't a new technique. It was the first time I sat down with a blank page and tried to write from scratch what I understood about something I'd been studying for weeks, and genuinely couldn't complete a paragraph. I wasn't a poor learner. I was using a method that hid my gaps from me and then blamed me for the consequences. The gap between where you are and where you want to be as a learner is almost certainly a method problem, and method problems have method solutions. Which of these 6 methods, when you heard it, produced a quiet recognition, a sense that this is specifically the gap that's been costing you? Start there. One method applied consistently makes the others obvious. If you want somewhere concrete to begin, after your next study session, write for 10 minutes from a blank page. No notes, no book, full sentences only. Mark every place you stall. Before tomorrow ends, find one person and explain the last thing you studied out loud. Ask them to say why every time you slow down. And pick one environmental change that makes your best learning behavior easier to access. That's enough to start with. The illusion of competence is comfortable. Real competence comes through a blank page, a spoken explanation, a genuine gap confronted. One at a time. Tell me in the comments which method you're starting with and what you're applying it to. I read every comment. Subscribe.